by the rivers of Babylon. Yeah, we sat down and we cried when we remembered Jerusalem. We were sick, Lord, near to dying. Oh, Jack.
Shalom, shalom, shalom. Welcome everyone once again to the D.C.B channel. My name is Chief Uziel Lewy, and we're here once again. We're bringing my brother. We're here with my brother, Rabbi Chief Binyamin, and he will be going over, because we have a lot of questions about Pesach, and people are still confused about certain things. So Rabbi Chief Binyamin is going to give you the do's and don'ts about Pesach or Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. We often call it Passover, but Passover is on the 14th day of dusk. This is really the bulk of the season is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, where the Most High God told us to make to get out of Egypt in haste and make the bread without the leavening in it, without putting the sourdough in it. So tonight we're going to have a special stream, because there are many of you that are still new and don't understand. Those of you that have been doing it for years already understand and already know certain things, but this is mostly speaking to the new people, to the new to our new people who are part of the of congregations and might not have a great understanding. Chief Binyamin, Chief Rabbi, or Rabbi Chief Binyamin, will be going over all the do's and don'ts and all the things that needs to be done for Pesach, especially our segment of the nation of Israel and what we do. We know people do things differently, but we're going to tackle it from a Torah perspective and see what is it that the Creator said for us to do and not to do. First and foremost, giving all glory to the supreme intelligence of the universe, Yehovah, giving glory unto his high and holy name, thanking the Most High God, creator of heaven and earth, for food, clothing, and shelter. And we thank the Most High God for life, knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. We'd like to thank the Most High God for everyone that's always supported us online, that's always here with us, that always has us in mind. We hope that the Most High God will bless each and every one of you, that the Most High God will protect you, and that the Most High God will keep you safe in all of your endeavors. We ask that the Most High God, creator of heaven and earth, continue to be with Yisrael scattered in the four corners of the earth, and that Yehovah will continue to be with those who are not as fortunate as us, to have a place to live, to have food to eat, to have a place to where we could glorify his high and holy name. So we thank everyone that's in the stream right now. About ready to, I want to do a Facebook Live, but the people on Facebook Live won't be able to see the actual slide, so probably not gonna do that, and I'm going to go straight and just share. Right now, I just ask everyone to share the links, amongst the people out there. Let the people know that we're on, and then that way we could get going. So without further ado, I just want to give a brief introduction about Rabbi Chief Binyamin. He's been a friend of mine since we were teenagers, actually. And the history of Chief Binyamin, as I remember it, is he's always been into music. He loves music. He's a DJ. But when he first came around, he was the type of person that was always quiet and didn't say much, but he was very studious. He joined every Hebrew class that there was. He joined anything that had to do with elevating himself or gaining some knowledge. he was always that type of person. So Chief Binyamin, you know, came through the ranks. He actually, you know, he did a lot more learning than I did, you know, when it came to the Hebrew and things like that. He was actually one of the brothers who helped me out with my Hebrew. And my Hebrew's still not that great, but Chief Binyamin helped me out to even get to the point that I got to. And he was very quiet, wasn't a teacher, wasn't anything until we had an unfortunate incident in the last place where we were at together. We had a fire. Then we ended up going to Binyamin, where they did read Hebrew there. And they used to call us up to read the Torah. So from that point on, we began to see the brilliance of Chief Binyamin, that he was so much more advanced than everybody else because he had been studying, he had taken it seriously. And then when we would go and do services on our own, when we wouldn't congregate with the brothers and sisters of Binyamin, started calling him up to do the Torah service in order for us to really get into the language. And Chief Binyamin knew, you know, he set up a Torah service for us. And from there, we started to go little by little. So Chief Binyamin always been a brilliant student. And then he started to teach. And then we realized that, God, this guy is brilliant. He just knows a lot of stuff and he understands a lot of stuff. So he's always been Torah based, always try to keep within the lines of the Torah. Don't try to deviate from it, go to the left or to the right. And hopefully tonight he'll be able to answer many of your questions about Pesach if you did not know. Some of the controversies that we might have in the community. He's going to bring the perspective from all angles, but give us the Torah base in order for us to understand and know exactly what the Torah says, bringing it from the Hebrew perspective and what we have understood from as far as tradition and what we have understood as far as traditions, basically. What's tradition and what's Torah? Because a lot of the things that we practice are tradition and they're not Torah. And our brother's going to tonight, he's going to show us in the Torah and break down a lot of things, and also, you know, the ingredients and certain things that we can and cannot have during this time. So at this time, I'll introduce everyone. My brother, Rabbi Chief Binyamin ben Binyamin. Rabbi.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Yeah, giving praise and honor to Yahuwah our God, who is the King of the universe, and thanking him for our lives, everybody that's tuned in and everybody that will be tuning in, because I know this will be recorded, and just praying that he will continue to be with us, and especially during the season that we're approaching. You know, first, you know, tomorrow night will be the new year for the children of Yisrael, you know, speaking about the month of Abib, which we'll be getting into during the presentation, but also 2 weeks after that, you know, just a remembrance of Pesach or Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is Chag Matzot. So just want to thank him for our lives and allowing us the opportunity to have the information that we have now, because many of our people are all lost. And just hoping that, especially at this time, that, you know, the information will be presented in truth, that he would give us knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, and that we will be able to answer the questions that are on the minds of people out there. And just, you know, before we officially get started, just to let people know that this teaching or this presentation is basically the tradition of CHOKMAH BINAH. So even though this is what we hold to be true, you know, there are people that observe Pesach and Chag Matzot in various different ways. But we just want to let people know how we observe it, you know, when we observe it, and the foods that we eat during that time. So, you know, once again, you know, there will be questions on the minds of people that, you know, hold it differently, but just wanted to give that disclaimer first, that this is basically a presentation for CHOKMAH BINAH and how we keep Pesach in the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So that way, you know, even though we hold this to be true, we don't want people to think that we're imposing our ideals and our traditions on everybody else. So, you know, we'll begin once again talking about Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And, people that are watching, I'll try to go through these slides. This is my first time actually doing slides through the YouTube. So hopefully they'll come through without a hitch. But speaking of Passover, Passover is an appointed season, as it says here, that which the children of Israel are commanded to observe every year on the 14th day of the first month of the Hebrew calendar at dusk. And you read about that in the book of Leviticus 23, verse 5, where it says, in the first month, on the 14th day of the month at dusk, is Jehovah's Passover. And in this month is called Abib. And Exodus 13:4, 23:15, 34:18, Deuteronomy 16:1. And it's the beginning of the month for the children of Israel. And then immediately following Passover is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which begins on the 15th day of Abib, lasting 7 days, concluding on the 21st day of Abib. And this right here are the verses that were just mentioned, because, there's a controversy sometimes on what is the first month on the Hebrew calendar, and when does it actually occur. So based on these 4 scriptures, these mention that the name of the first month, which is Abib, in these scriptures. And then also in Exodus 12, verse 2, it said that this shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Amongst the children of Israel, as we're scattered, we say that there are other New Years or that there are different beginnings of the months, but we're going by what Jehovah God said. And he commanded the children of Israel that Abib shall be the beginning of months unto us. And this was the month that became out of Egypt, or Mitzrayim. So now, dealing with both Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, what they do is commemorate the first Passover that took place in Egypt and the subsequent exodus from Egypt. Passover was the night that Jehovah God passed over Egypt, slaying all the firstborn from man to beast. And the service which is to be held regarding the lamb, the unleavened bread, and bitter herbs serves as a memorial of the events surrounding the Passover in Egypt. And what we'll see is that amongst various Israelite congregations, that even though we are in captivity, and even though we're in various lands, and even though some of our people are in the land of Israel, also, still, that when it comes to Passover night or Pesach night, that there is some form of service which includes lamb, which includes eating of unleavened bread, and includes eating bitter herbs, because those are the 3 items that were specified to us when we went in Egypt during our first Passover, that we had to eat that night when we were going to prepare ourselves to leave out of Egypt. Started from the following morning and moving on out. So these are things that are done as a memorial throughout various congregations, and even in Beit Da'at CHOKMAH BINAH, that we do include the lamb in the service. We eat the unleavened bread and we eat the bitter herbs as a memorial. And it's not just strictly a memorial, but it is a commandment that we eat unleavened bread and bitter herbs. We eat, those of us that eat meat, eat lamb that night as a memorial, but, especially in our congregation, we don't say that that's an offering. We don't consider that a Passover lamb. We don't consider it a Passover offering or sacrifice. The lamb is just representative of the offering, but at our congregation, we don't treat any eating of the lamb in the form of an offering, where we would actually not break any bone in it or roast it whole. People just eat it as a memorial of the fact that lamb would be eaten on that night. And then, we're going to say that the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which follows, is a reminder that the children of Israel left Egypt in haste, insomuch that they were not able to allow their bread to rise, and ate unleavened bread during the initial stages of the Exodus. And in Exodus chapters 11 through 13 tells us about this series of events that took place when we, were coming out of Egypt. And this is a joyous occasion which connects Jehovah God with the children of Israel, and it is a memorial of the birth of the nation. Before that, we were just strictly the children of Israel. We were not literally a nation, because we were inside of Egypt, which is us being within another nation. But now we have the opportunity to go forth on our own and to be our own nation. So now we're dealing with the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which comes with certain laws. And the primary laws that deal with the Feast of Unleavened Bread is that we don't eat anything leavened. So this is in regards to any bread, cake, or basically any baked goods that come from a grain product. And the removal of leavening from our houses is what we have to make sure that we do during the 7 days of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So, just to repeat once again that we're not allowed to eat anything leavened or eat any leavened bread or any leavened grain products. And at CHOKMAH BINAH, that's what we focus on, that we do not eat any leavened grain products. So now the term leavening refers explicitly to bread. Whenever we read about leavening in the Holy Scriptures, and then even if you look up leavening by definition, you're talking about bread or some sort of baked grain product. And now when we're going back to the Holy Scriptures, the two words in Hebrew that refer to the subject are sa'or and chametz. So now, this just shows the verses that were in the previous slide, that it says in Exodus 12:15, that 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread. Howbeit the first day you shall put away leaven out of your houses, for whosoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. And then in Exodus chapter 12, verses 19 through 20, it says, 7 days shall there be no leaven found in your houses, for whosoever eats that which is leaven, that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he be a sojourner or one that is born in the land. You shall eat nothing leavened in all your habitations, so you eat unleavened bread. So once again, that was just done to reiterate the verses that tell us, or that introduces to us, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So now we're just going to deal with the subject of Sa'or, which...
Chief, before you carry on, I have a question. Where does the concept of not eating roasted corn on Pesach come from?
Well, I'm gonna probably touch that a little bit, but a general concept that people go to is in Leviticus 23, where after we read about Passover, we read about the Feast of Unleavened Bread, then we're told that we're supposed to put, quote unquote, the sickle to the grain. And then that's when we count the 50 days to Shavuot. And it mentions that until we do that offering of putting the sickle to the grain, not 50 days later, but that initial day where after the Shabbat we perform that offering, it said that we should not eat any grain, or we should eat not any parched corn. But that's just the translation is basically saying don't eat any parched grain. And that means just don't eat any grain that came up in that new year. So once the year turns and you have a new harvest of grain, that you're not supposed to eat of any of the new grain of that year until you give an offering unto Jehovah first. So the concept, one of the concepts of not eating corn comes from that. But that's just based on a mistranslation. Well, not really a mistranslation, a misunderstanding of the translation of corn. Because in the King James and the Gideon Bibles, they'll translate the word of grain to corn. And when people think of corn, they in the United States, they think of what is known as maize, the yellow corn or the purple corn, but those did not grow in the Mediterranean. So when the writers of the King James and those Bibles used the word corn, that was the Old English term for grain. And that's so, once again, it's not really a mistranslation. It's just that today we have a misunderstanding of what that translation is. And then we'll get into a little bit more about why, some people don't eat. There's other reasons why people don't eat corn, but that's the main reason that people use on why they don't eat corn during that time. And then going back to the subject of Sa'or, basically Sa'or, when we talk about the Holy Scriptures, means sourdough or yeast. And it's basically referring to any agent that's used to make bread rise. And that word itself only appears 5 times in the Holy Scriptures. And those are the verses that appears Exodus 12:15, 12:19, 13:7, Leviticus 2:11, and Deuteronomy 16:14. And I'll just jump to the next slide real quick, which mentions those verses. And where you see the highlighted and bolded word leaven, that's where you see the word Sa'or in the Hebrew translation of those verses. And once again, those are the only 5 places where you see the word sa'or. And in all of these verses, the word sa'or is in connection to bread. And then, today amongst Israelites, we include the term fermentation. But fermentation doesn't really apply to any of those passages that we just read, because once again, the term sa'or is specifically talk about grain products. But when we talk about sa'or, it really is talking about sourdough, barm, yeast, basically ancient methods that were used to make dough rise to become bread. So by definition, fermentation is a process of which an agent causes an organic substance to break down into simpler substances, especially the anaerobic breakdown of sugar into alcohol. And this cannot be the sa'or, which was commanded to be removed, because fermentation is a process as opposed to being an ingredient or an item that you can remove. Fermentation is just something that naturally occurs to almost anything. That's what it says. It causes an organic substance to break down. So anything that's natural and it goes through a process and breaks down, then that's fermentation. So when God is telling us not to eat any leavened bread during the 7 days, it's specifically talking about bread and not removing every process out of the land. So in modern day, translation, once again, it doesn't really apply. The term fermentation doesn't really apply. So now we're going to deal with the word chokmah, which is also in the Holy Scriptures. And this means to be leavened, to be cruel or red. But in this subject that we talk about leavened bread, chokmah, when it's used as a noun. And sometimes they're loosely translated as leaven, but most of the time you'll see it translated as leavened bread. And just to give reference, there's a word called Matzot, also in the Holy Scriptures, which refers to leavened bread as well. But it's basically connected to this word chokmah. So as a noun, the word chokmah appears 11 times. In Exodus 12:15, 13:3, 13:7, 23:18, 34:25, Leviticus 2:11, 6:17, 7:13, 23:17, Deuteronomy 16:3, and Amos chapter 4, verse 5. So those are the 11 times that the word chokmah appears as a noun. You'll still have the same pronunciation of chokmah when it's used as a verb, but as a noun, these are the verses that it appears in, and these are all in connection with bread once again. So as a verb, it appears 8 times. And these 8 times in Exodus 12:19, 20, 34, 39, and Hosea 7:4 are all in connection with bread. So a bulk of the times that the word chokmah is used as a verb is found in Exodus chapter 12, which is the same chapter that describes Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now, the other times that it appears, though the word appears as a verb, are in Psalms 71:4, Psalm 73:21, and Isaiah 63:1. And that gives you the other definitions in terms of being cruel or turning red. There is a connection in Hebrew to most verbs and nouns, but sometimes the connections may be loosely based. So when it comes to these, the last 3, that's when it's in the verb form, they really have no connection to the using it as in connection with bread. And this is just an example of 5 of those verses where you'll see chokmah translated as leavened bread. And we could always discuss these things, but most of the times when we talk about chokmah, we're talking about some sort of grain product. So now we're just going to jump into another subject, which leads into somewhat the question that was just asked by Chief Uziel in terms of not eating corn and also other types of grain. And there's a term called kitniyot, which comes from, it's a Hebrew word which means little things. So now these references are going to give us where the concept of not eating certain types of grain on the Feast of Unleavened came from. So this first reference is on its own, and this is a quote, and you could go to the link that's on the bottom here, and you'll see this paragraph and much more of an explanation of kitniyot. But this is once again just an introduction to what kitniyot is. So on its own, this rule requires fairly extensive effort to observe, but it is at least quite clear. For the past 700 years, however, Ashkenazic Jews have complicated Passover observance by avoiding rice, millet, and legumes. These are collectively known as kitniyot, from the Hebrew word quatan, which means little. In recent years, the discovery of the New World food quinoa, which most Jews now consider kosher for Passover, has eased the kitniyot burden somewhat. And as a note, they say that the Conservative Movement's Committee on Jewish Law and Standards ruled in December 2015 that kitniyot now are permitted on Passover. So what basically they're saying here is that the kitniyot, or these particular grains, the rice, the millet, and the legumes, you know, beans being a form, just an example of a legume, that they dated back, and the other slides will let us know more explicitly that this concept of not eating these particular grains goes back to only the 13th century, and that only comes amongst the Ashkenazi Jews, or the Jews in Europe. So here's another reference that talks about kitniyot. The medieval Jewish sages placed a ban on eating legumes, kitniyot, on Passover because they are similar in texture to chametz. Even bread can be made out of their flour, so people might assume that if, for example, cornbread can be eaten on Passover, wheat or rye bread can be eaten too. This prohibition includes rice, beans, and corn. This injunction was unanimously accepted by Ashkenazic Jews. Many Sephardic Jews, however, continue to eat kitniyot on Passover. If you're Sephardic, speak to your rabbi to determine your family and community tradition. And the prohibition is only with regards to consumption of kitniyot. There is no obligation, however, to destroy or sell kitniyot products before Passover. So amongst Jewish people, they make a difference between the concept of what chametz is and kitniyot. And the last sentence is basically saying that when it comes to kitniyot, the Ashkenazi Jews would not get rid of kitniyot from their homes. They wouldn't eat it because that's their safety valve, so to speak, because it's something that looks small. It's something that looks similar to wheat and barley when you grind it up. It's something that reacts the same way to water, in a sense, to wheat and barley. But they're saying that they understand it is not chametz, so they understand that it's not something that's prohibited by Torah. But that's just a rule that they made up in order to protect themselves. And once again, it wasn't all of the Jewish community that was prohibiting it. It was just primarily the Ashkenazi Jews, or the Jewish people in Europe, that placed that ban on it. And they, once again, wouldn't even get rid of the kitniyot from their homes. It was just something that they would refrain from eating throughout the 7 days of Chag Matzot. And here's another reference which says, chametz is defined as one of the 5 grains, wheat, spelt, barley, oats, and rye, which has come in contact with water for more than 18 minutes. This is a serious Torah prohibition, and for that reason, we take extra protective measures on Passover to prevent any mistakes. So once again, this is the quote for this will come at the end, but when I'm reading I'm not talking about CHOKMAH BINAH. I'm just reading a quote from a Jewish source of what their understanding of chametz is and what kitniyot is as well. So once again, this reference is making a difference between chametz and kitniyot, and it lets you know that chametz is only defined by the 5 grains, wheat, spelt, barley, oats, and rye. And then it's going to go in the next paragraph. It says, which brings us to the category of prohibited Passover foods called kitniyot, sometimes referred to generically as legumes. This includes rice, corn, soybeans, string beans, peas, lentils, mustard, sesame seeds, and poppy seeds. Even though kitniyot cannot technically become chametz, Ashkenazi Jews do not eat them on Passover. And they ask why. So once again, is just pay attention to that paragraph, because it's saying that kitniyot, the things that are listed there from the rice all the way to the poppy seeds, they understand cannot be chametz by Torah. But the Ashkenazi Jews did not eat them. And it mentions why in the next paragraph. The Samach, or who was the Rabbi Yitzchak of Korbel, so remember these are Ashkenazi Jews in Europe, explains that products of kitniyot appear like chametz products. So they're just talking about the look of it. So they prohibited everything from rice and beans because it looks like the wheat and spelt and the barley and the oats and the rye. Not because they understand that Torah prohibits it, but they prohibited it because it looks like those things. So for example, it can be hard to distinguish between rice flour, because once again, when you grind up rice and you make it a flour, kitniyot, and a wheat flour, which is chamates. Therefore, to prevent confusion, all kitniyot was prohibited, because somebody might make rice flour and store it in their house, just as they might store wheat flour. And when you grind them up, they look similar. So that's why they made the prohibition with the rice based on the look. And once again, no connection with Torah whatsoever, but just based on looks. And then another, they continue to say the Beit Yosef, who is the Rabbi Yosef Cairo, who's a 16th century rabbi in Israel, notes that since regular grains may become mixed together with kitniyot, once again referring back to the previous note of rice flour could be mixed with wheat flour, but they just look similar. Apparently, due to changes in crop cycles, one may inadvertently come to eat actual chamates. In Jewish law, there is one important distinction between chamates and kitniyot. During Passover, it's forbidden to even have chamates in one's possession, hence the custom of selling chamates. On the other hand, it is permitted to own kitniyot during Passover and even to use it, not for eating, but for things like baby powder, which contains cornstarch. Similarly, someone who is sick is allowed to take medicine containing kitniyot. Interestingly, the Sephardi Jewish community never adopted the prohibition against kitniyot. This creates the strange situation, for example, where a Sephardi family could be eating rice on Passover, whereas their Ashkenazi neighbors will not. And the reference for that is there. So those previous slides give you 3 references to talk about why Jewish people do not eat rice, the beans, and certain grains because of the appearance of it when it's grinded up as flour, but they know and understand that it is not chamates, that they actually give it a different term. They treat it differently. They'll remove chamates from their houses, but they won't remove rice and beans from their houses. And this is a tradition that many Israelites in America have picked up in following Ashkenazi tradition and getting rid of rice and beans and things like that from their homes based on what Ashkenazi Jews have always been practiced. So now getting back to how we at BINAH CHOKMAH BINAH keep Passover, based upon Jehovah God's law and the state of modern processes, BINAH CHOKMAH BINAH teaches its members to eat only fresh foods and ground foods during the season. And as a precaution, so that's why it's in bold, as a precaution, canned foods, cheese, vinegar containing products, pastas, and other flour products are also left alone. But once again, we're making a distinction to what chamates is, but as a precaution for us, because we don't control the processes of how canned foods are made or how cheeses are made and vinegar containing products and the pastas and everything, we don't control the process of how these are made. But these are made as facilities that have grain products and have yeast and the things that we should not have during those 7 days. Therefore, as a precaution, we leave those alone. But so that's why we focus on eating fresh foods and ground foods during that season. And then the next slide will give us the list of ingredients which should be avoided. So what we're going to talk about next is things that should actually be avoided during that season. But once again, we have a set of things that we don't eat as a precaution. But this list here are the things that should not be in your home at all during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, because these things are chamates. Because once again, chamates are forms of yeast, forms of sourdough, forms of barm, which is, or once again, ancient methods of making dough rise. So primarily, these ingredients we would avoid not only in the foods that we eat, but in our hygienic products that we use, from our soaps to our toothpastes and everything like that. So primarily, you may not see everything that's on this list of something, but you will see things like baking soda and baking powder. So this list gives you the general name for like baking powder, but then you also look for phosphate. You also look for baker's ammonium, which is ammonium bicarbonate. You look for sodium bicarbonate. You look for any of these things on this list, and these are the things that you have to remove from your homes during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, because these are actual chamates. So this is what we at BINAH CHOKMAH BINAH teach. And some people do more, some people do less, but we just want to stress that this is just our tradition on how we keep Passover and how we keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread and how we prepare for it by getting rid of these products. And, you know, some of these products could always be up for debate. There could be things that could be added, but that would be added based on what Torah says and not what people think. And the same way as things can be taken out based on what Torah says and not what people think. So our congregation tries to focus more on what Torah says, but then we do explain the difference between what Torah says and what is tradition. So, you know, we explained, you know, earlier with a tradition of getting rid of more than what's on this list dictates. But even amongst the Jewish people, they realized that that wasn't Torah, but that was just something that they instituted as a tradition. And in the conclusion, you know, as mentioned before, that this is a joyous season and not one which would be difficult to comply with. And the Feast of Unleavened Bread merely prohibits the eating of leavened bread. And that's what we stress, and that's what we focus on at our congregation, that being that it's called the Feast of Unleavened Bread, being that kamates by definition in Hebrew means leavened bread, being that Seor by definition is talking about sourdough strictly, but we also have to include yeast because that's what people use today instead of sourdough, but that same process of sourdough is what the yeast actually does to the dough to make it rise. This is what we're removing from our homes during the 7 days, and we make sure that we eat unleavened bread through the 7 days. And that's basically what us in our congregation, and even before, you know, we formed our congregation, this is the practice that we've been instituting for years. And, you know, this is the way that we see it in Torah, and that's the way that we teach it. So, you know, once again, thanking Yehovah God for the opportunity to bring forth this information. And hopefully, in the bringing forth of this information, nobody is led astray, and that we're not led astray ourselves, you know, with our understanding. But we all have the opportunity to grow. We all have the opportunity to learn, and we all have the opportunity to share. But we always try to stress a focus on what Yehovah God teaches in his commandments and in his instructions, which is the Torah. So at this time, I'll turn it back to Chief Uziel. But I believe at this time we'll be taking questions from anybody out there that might have anything to add or anything to ask.
Torah Rabbi, Chief Binyamin, thank you for that excellent presentation and bringing forth understanding to the people and letting our people understand Torah, because that's the important part. You know, that's the important part about this thing that we always try to bring. We try to bring it from the Torah perspective, and in doing that, we won't be confused. So, the kitniyot, it's a Jewish tradition, right? That's what you said.
Yeah, it goes as far back, when you do the research, it goes as far back as 13th century. There's no evidence of any removal of rice and beans and any of those legumes before 13th century. And by that time, when you think about Torah observers, you're talking about primarily people in the Jewish community, and they were dictating what they would do amongst themselves. But when you speak to people, you know, speak to Israelites, I should say, in various other countries throughout Africa and even in the land of Israel, they never had an issue with rice and beans. But it's only, you know, in America, because, you know, the Ashkenazi Jews, their influence is heavier here. So when we got into knowledge of ourselves, you know, even though we should and we do speak strongly against what they practice, we do tend to bring in a lot of their practices in the way that we keep Torah. So that's why we have that issue pretty much in the United States, but in other countries where Israelites are, you know, the kitniyot is not really an issue. And, you know, even amongst all Jewish people, as you know, stated, is not really an issue. It's only an issue amongst the Ashkenazi. And, you know, as I said 2 years ago, the conservative movement of the Ashkenazi decided to start eating kitniyot once again in their homes.
So my question is, did people like Rabbi Matthew, Rabbi Ford, and did they follow this tradition of not eating rice and beans, and down to Rabbi Yirmiyahu and these men that were part of that rabbinic order?
I don't want to say yes for sure. I'd have to ask people. There are still people that are still around, that are still alive from that era, that would be able to give the better answer. So I don't want to speak for them and say that they were doing that when I'm not sure. I can only assume that they kept that custom because, once again, when we started getting into knowledge of ourselves in America, many of our people did look to the Jewish people and the way that they practice Torah as a template on how we should keep it. So, for sure, definitely when people were getting knowledge of themselves, certain things like not eating meat and cheese, that's what Israelites were doing back in the early 1900s, because that's what Jewish people were doing. We evolved out of that through time. So I would just assume that we also, in the early 1900s and continuing on, were not eating rice and beans, because that's what the Ashkenazi Jewish people were doing at the time. And then, just like the meat and milk thing, we evolved out of that. Many of us evolved, and we didn't have a problem with eating rice and beans during the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
Because not eating rice and beans is actually not Torah for Pesach, right?
Right, it's not Torah. It's not a Torah prohibition.
Okay. As far as wine, right? Can you go over one more time the definition? Can you find any place in the Torah where we see the presence of wine during this time of unleavened bread? Because people always say Pesach. We always say Pesach, but Pesach is actually just a short period of time. That's the 14th day at evening. But what we're actually discussing is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and what we can and what we cannot have during that time. So can you find in Torah where during this season there was wine in the midst of us, in the midst of our people, offerings, whatever it might be?
Okay, we can go to Leviticus 23. So in Leviticus 23, verse 4 starts off telling us that the first 3 verses talk about Shabbat, and it also introduces to us the holy convocations, the appointed seasons of Yahweh. So verse 9 starts talking about the procedure that leads up to the Feast of Shavuot. So just to backtrack a little bit, between verses 4 and 8, it talks about Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And then it's a common practice amongst the children of Israel to start counting for Shavuot after the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So verse 9, this is Leviticus 23, verse 9. And Yahweh spoke unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When you are come into the land which I give unto you, and shall reap the harvest thereof, then you shall bring the sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest unto the priest. And he shall wave the sheaf before Yahweh to be accepted for you on the morrow after the Shabbat, or after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. And in the day when you wave the sheaf, you shall offer a he lamb without blemish of the first year for a burnt offering unto Yahweh, and the meal offering thereof shall be 2/10 parts of an ephah of fine flour mingled with oil, an offering made by fire unto Yahweh for a sweet savor, and the drink offering thereof shall be of wine, the 4th part of a hin. And ye shall eat neither bread, nor parched corn, nor fresh ears until the selfsame day, until you have brought the offering of your God. It is a statute forever throughout your generations in all of your dwellings. And just to focus on verse 13, once again, which says, And the meal offering thereof shall be 2/10 parts of an ephah of fine flour mingled with oil, an offering made by fire unto Yahweh for a sweet savor, and the drink offering thereof shall be of wine, the 4th part of a hin. Now, this offering, once again, amongst many Israelites in America, is taught that this offering will be performed the day after the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The discussion of that is another controversy for another day, but most people do the count from Shavuot from the day after the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now, the offering that goes with that, it mentions that the drink offering shall be of wine. So if the offering of wine is going to be on the second day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, that means that there was wine present in the land during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So that's one of the main points to explain that we did not get rid of wine in the land during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, because we had it as part of the offering. And if, once again, if you're definitely going to subscribe to the teaching that this offering would be done after the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, then you would have to have wine present in the land in order to perform that offering.
Yes, because to have wine, it's a process. You just can't create wine from one day to another. It's a process that takes fermentation, and the grapes actually got to go through a certain change. So thank you. So seor, the word you use, the word seor, right? Seor is strictly speaking about sourdough, and that is that what you're saying?
Yeah, in the strictest sense, because that, you know, we didn't have baker's yeast back then. So in the strict sense, seor is talking about the sourdough, which is, just to simplify the explanation, was dough that was made and left alone for a period of time, and that was allowed to ferment, and then that batch of dough that was allowed to ferment was added to a new batch of dough, and then that would be used to make the dough rise. Because we read in Exodus 12 when we left Egypt that the reason why we keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread is because we didn't have enough time for the dough to rise. So because we had to leave in haste. So the word seor is talking about strictly about sourdough, because that's one of the most ancient ways of making bread. So in the strictest sense, seor is talking about sourdough.
So the restriction is not against fermentation, but it's against the fermentation of that sourdough, which today we will call yeast, baking powder, so forth and so on, right?
Right, because with the sourdough, when it was to make the sourdough, that dough that was left aside, basically it would develop yeast on its own, because yeast is something that naturally occurs. You know, so once you leave that dough out, the yeast that's actually in the atmosphere would, you know, attach to that dough and just continue to multiply and multiply. And then once you add that, so basically that was an original form of making baker's yeast, but you had to use dough in order to do that. So, you know, so once again, the seor that we read about in the Holy Scriptures is talking about sourdough, but because it brings forth that process of making yeast, that's why, you know, in modern Hebrew, we could attach the word yeast to that terminology. But in the ancient Hebraic term with that, or for that, would just be the sourdough. So, because we don't want to introduce too many things for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So we don't want to say it strictly means sourdough, and then that would make baker's yeast okay, because baker's yeast would not be okay, because that same sourdough that was used brought about that same process. But, you know, just to answer the question on the simple level, the sourdough, the seor is strictly talking about sourdough.
So I get you. You saying sourdough, but we got so many products now that make the bread rise that you stay away from that, because that was the emphasis, that the bread could not rise, right?
Right. The emphasis is not making leavened bread. So whatever you can add to make dough become leavened, would it be in the modern Hebrew, we'd have to attach that word seor to that term. So that would be the baking powder. That would be the yeast. And then, you know, the list of items that we spoke about earlier, that those are the things that in today, because, you know, the languages evolve. So the term seor, if we were people that were just strictly speaking Hebrew and we talk about seor, we would understand that that's talking about something that you would add to dough to make it rise. And I believe we had the discussion last year amongst, because you speaking along with Chief Co had about, you know, in Spanish speaking countries, there's a term that is used. And when y'all read it in the Spanish, y'all automatically understand it to strictly mean the sourdough. I don't know what that word is, but I know, you know, we had that discussion last year as well. So, you know, a lot of our complications as Israelites comes from reading English, but reading Hebrew, reading other languages that the Hebrew was translated into, we get a strict understanding of what's supposed to be done. It's just when we read it in English, then because English words have so many different meanings, that's when we as Israelites run into a lot of problems.
I believe that word in Spanish is levadura. So when we hear levadura, we don't think fermentation, we don't think beans, rice, we don't think it. Levadura is strictly what we will know as yeast, right? Something that you put in the bread to make it rise. So once we see levadura, that's what we think of. We don't think of anything else. I think that's the word, but I'll look it up. So okay, that's the word. As far as so what are some of the products that that you recommend for people to get? Like let's start off with like soap, toothpaste, deodorant, lotions, things of that nature. Can you give the people a name, maybe some products that they could use so that they make it easier for them, so that they could go out and get it?
Yeah, well, in terms of toothpaste in particular, you know, Tom's, and you have to actually read the labels and the ingredients. But Tom's does have a line of toothpaste that does not have baking soda in it or the sodium bicarbonate in it. So that would just be a brand name that would be safe to use during this time. And, you know, so once again, yes, you know, just focus on things like that. This is the time where, you know, a lot of people can go into your local health food stores, or if you have the bigger chains such as the Whole Foods and the Fairway, you would go into those stores and, you know, this is what you just got to read the labels. But, you know, just to give a name of a company off the top of, you know, my head, I would just say Tom's of Maine in terms of toothpaste and the soaps and things like that. But just bearing in mind, I'm not just giving you the name of the company and think that everything from that company is okay. You still have to read the ingredients. But, you know, instead of, you know, giving a name of a company, you know, a good start would be the local health food store and, you know, the bigger chains such as the Fairway and the Whole Foods to look for items that don't have those ingredients in it. And, you know, once again, you know, being that we teach that at our congregation, you know, it's not about getting rid of a whole bunch of things. So just for those 7 days, you know, we keep it simple. You know, this is the time we start weaning things out of our homes. So by the time, you know, if we need to buy the deodorants and the soap for those 7 days, you buy it now, and then you have it in your house by the time, you know, the Feast of Unleavened Bread comes around.
All right, Torah, I have it here. The word in the Leviticus chapter 23, verse 5. And it reads, I'm going to read it in Spanish and then I'm going to try to interpret it. La Pascua, the Passover of Yahweh, comienza el día 14 del mes primero, on the 14th day of the first month, a la hora del crepúsculo, at dusk, right? At the time of dusk, right? El día 15 del mismo mes comienza, said on the 15th day of the same month, mes comienza la fiesta de los panes. We'll start the feast of panes sin levadura en honor al Señor. It will start the feast of unleavened bread in honor to Yahweh. That's what it says. So levadura, when we hear the word levadura, and I'm only using it because, like they said, when you listen to something in a different language, if somebody is learning about themselves in Spanish, or they're coming to knowledge of themselves, when they read that word levadura, only thing they're going to eliminate is they're going to eliminate yeast. or bread with yeast in it, baking powder. That's it. Anything that makes the bread rise, because that's all we know levadura to be. You know, so I don't know. The argument and the confusion was brought in, I guess, through the years, through But could you give me a little bit of that history with because I know that there's been a lot of controversy as far as the uses of the word rabbi, or maybe you becoming a rabbi and going to school to become a rabbi. Can you give a little explanation on that, and can you expound on that a little, and why was it that you pursued that, and what's your reasoning for pursuing that title?
Okay, the term rabbi is it's a Hebraic term which properly is pronounced Rabbi. You know, it just there was just a mispronunciation that came along. I don't know where, but that would be amongst the Jewish, community that gave that improper pronunciation. But the correct pronunciation of Rabbi, which comes from the word Rav, which you do find in the Old Testament or the Holy Scriptures. You do find it in the first 5 books, actually, and it just means elder. Later on in the Aramaic translations, you'll see it mean teacher. So basically, when you see where you pronounce Rabbi, you're basically saying my elder or my teacher. Now, the institution of the Rabbim came around amongst the children of Israel in the land of Israel at a point in time where the temple was still up, but the role of the priest was declining for various reasons. We know how we as a people, did a lot of things that we weren't supposed to do. So the role of the priest was declining. So there was an institution of just having people teach Torah. And that's where the institution of the Rabbim came about. And, there were schools of Rabbim that came about while we were still in the land before the temple was destroyed in 70 CE. And, primarily when we talk about the Rabbim, you'll have them primarily in the sect of the Israelites called the Pharisees, although there was some amongst the Sadducees and amongst the other sects. But, primarily amongst the Pharisees is where you have a bulk of the well-known Rabbim. That's where they come from. And so basically that's where that tradition came about, because once again, there was a decline in the priesthood for various reasons. And, as time went on and the temple got destroyed and then the priests had no place to function, there was still a need to have people that would teach Torah. So that's where the tradition of the Rabbim continued on and on from generation after generation. Then there came a point in time once you had the Europeans that converted into our way of life. They took basically everything that we were already doing in Torah. They started adding to some of the books that we started writing, which is the Mishnah. And, me throwing the word or the term Mishnah does not mean that I accept the Mishnah as Torah, but the Mishnah was written by Israelites, and its writing or its explanation or its commentary was continued by European Jews, and that's where you get the Talmud today. Just to give a brief overview on that. And that's a subject that we will, because we definitely need to have a discussion just on that. The forming of the Talmud, what they came from the children of Israel, whether it just came strictly from Europeans. That's the subject that we do need to get into. But just right now, giving a brief overview of where the term rabbi comes from and where the institution came about. And then in terms of the Israelites and the children of Israel in America, as we know our history here, especially in the East Coast, was Rabbi Matthew, you had Rabbi Ford, who basically were instrumental in the resurgence of the children of Israel and knowledge of ourselves in America. And, the term rabbi was just something that was always associated with a Torah teacher. So those were the titles that were, that they used. And then they trained other people after them. Rabbi Matthew, instituted his own congregation. Rabbi Ford did also, but he eventually moved back to Ethiopia. So Rabbi Matthew was still here, formed Command of the Keepers, started training rabbis. And then that tradition just came, all the way down to today, almost, we're approaching 100 years, two years from now of the actual formation of commandment keepers. And, just celebrating the fact of, well, it's more than 100 years of Israelite information in America, but just in terms of an institution of one teacher teaching other teachers and going down the line, we're about to approach 100 years of that. So, my, I wouldn't want to call it a quest, but my introduction to the whole system was basically a way of continuing that process, because something that was started by Rabbi Matthew and became so great, there are many, rabbis amongst the children of Israel today, but we're getting to a point where there's not a generation of people trying to become that. So, me becoming a rabbi, part of it is just to keep that tradition going so that it wouldn't die out, and that, hopefully using the position that I have would influence other people and encourage other people to do the same in order to keep that tradition going. It doesn't mean that you have to change any of the values that you have as an Israelite, because we're all Torah observers. So we all have our own, well, unfortunately, we do have our own interpretations of Torah, but we're all Torah observers. So, becoming a rabbi doesn't change your method of keeping Torah. It just means that you're trained to be a teacher, and also trained, as a student of Torah, to also continue studying as well. And also what it does, what I realize that it does now, which is not something that I realized before, what it does now is because in the secular world, the term rabbi is actually a term that people know. So when I'm telling people before about being an Israelite, it was something that it was like, yeah, okay. Now when they hear the term rabbi associated with an Israelite, they tend to give this way of life more respect. Just as in Christianity, people give respect to a pastor or a reverend, because this is a term that they're familiar with. So now, for some reason, and I'm not saying it should be, but for now, so for some reason in the secular world, people, tend to listen more to what being an Israelite is about now, as opposed to before. So, there was no specific goal in mind. It was something that came about, something that happened. I was introduced to the school when they were trying to restart the school when I entered it. And, I just wanted to be a part of that process and help the school continue on. And hopefully, with me continuing and getting to the point that I'm at now, once again, hopefully it encourages others to join and, keep the school going, and keep the teaching going, and basically keep this movement going overall.
Thank you, Rabbi Chief Binyamin. And you becoming a rabbi, does it minimize your appreciation of what you learn from your teachers that did not come from the Rabbinic Academy? Does it minimize the understanding that they had, or anything that you learned from them?
No, actually, it does the opposite. It doesn't minimize what I was taught. It actually increases it, because I have, I always had an appreciation for what I was taught, and now I have even more of an appreciation for it. And also I can use what I was taught to bring to another community of Israelites. So it's about sharing the information. I've learned, I've definitely learned a lot, and there's much more to learn under a rabbinical system, but I have a lot to share as well, based on what I've learned, under the system I was in before, under Prince, and then becoming a chief. I have a lot that I could actually share, and hopefully this will be a process of bringing clarity, because we do have this division between the rabbinical system and a quote unquote cultural Israelite system. There's really, and that's even saying that alone is like, there is no such term as a cultural Israelite system, but that's just what it's, some people refer to it as. But, hopefully this is a way of bridging the gap and showing people that, we're still the same, because instead of fighting amongst each other, we should be joining forces, because we all proclaim to serve one God. We all do things such as keep Shabbat day holy. So it's not like, the rabbinic system were Messianic Israelites. It's not like the rabbinic system were people that were just Shabbat, breakers. These were people that keep Torah just like we do. So this is just a way of bringing clarity among both sides. The only thing that's really different is the way that we dress. But other than that, and even amongst the quote unquote cultural Israelites, there's still no form of dress anyway. So this is just a way of bringing clarity amongst all Israelites.
All right, my brother. Thank you for clearing that up. You have someone on the chat who asks, "What about spelt during Pesach? Can we have spelt during Pesach?" And I believe that was Sister Marsha Yisrael. I think she's tuning in from Jamaica, if I'm not mistaken. What about spelt? And anybody, if you want to ask questions, you could post your questions up on the stream. Any questions that you have on Pesach, you could post them up. And if I don't see it, you can, and if you want to, you could help us out and donate to our channel by hitting the super chat button at the bottom, the $, and that will take your question all the way to where I could see it, and it will be highlighted. So you can make a little small donation and get your question answered right away. All right. So everybody that's online, you can also help us out at the same time. You hit the super chat button, and you could help us out, help out our channel by donating, and your question will be highlighted at the top. So can we eat spelt during Pesach? Spelt flour, I guess I assume that they're saying.
Yeah, spelt is okay. Yeah, so we have wheat, we have barley, we have spelt, because those are natural grains. And so as long as you're not adding any leavening agent to it, making bread out of spelt is okay for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And there was a question earlier. I'll type up my email in the YouTube. Somebody asked for my email a while ago. Let me find it, and then I'll post it also. And I'm still looking through for any other questions as well.
Chief Binyamin, we'll post this email address up on the chat. You putting it on the chat, right?
Yeah, on the YouTube. That's what I'm looking at.
On the YouTube chat, so that anyone who has any direct questions to him, and remember, people, no question is a stupid or a dumb question. Any question that you have, even down to detergent, if you want to think about that, you could just ask any question, and Chief Binyamin is here to answer it. And if I could answer it, I'll answer it. But I think he did a thorough search on everything, the things that we have controversy on, the things that we see, the do's and the don'ts. These are all the things that Chief Binyamin has already covered and left no doubts, without no shadow of a doubt, that he leave any doubt that about the things that he was saying. So if you have questions now, Bavakusha, please. Please do that.
Yeah, I put an email address in there. I had to put it that way because YouTube doesn't allow email addresses to be placed in the comments. So that's Binyamin at BinahYisrael.org. So I know Yeshaya had asked for an email address, so I don't know if it's apparent in the comments, but when I put it the regular way, it didn't allow me to put it, so that's why I typed it at that. But people could send questions or anything, because there's many other things that I try to get involved with, so people can always reach me at that email address, Binyamin at BinahYisrael.org.
I just want to read something here real quick. It's speaking about Passover. So this is Numbers chapter 28, verse 16, and it reads, "And in the first month, on the 14th day of the month, is Jehovah's Passover. On the 15th day of this month shall be a feast. 7 days shall unleavened bread be eaten. And in the first day shall be a holy convocation. He shall do no manner of servile work. But he shall present an offering made by fire, a burnt offering unto Jehovah, 2 young bullocks, 1 ram, and 7 he lambs of the first year. They shall be unto you without blemish. And their meal offering, fine flour mingled with oil, 3 tenth parts shall ye offer for a bullock, and 2 tenth parts for the ram. In a several tenth parts shalt thou offer for every lamb of the 7 lambs, and 1 he goat for a sin offering to make atonement for you. He shall offer these beside the burnt offering of the morning, which is for a continued burnt offering. After this manner ye shall offer daily, for 7 days, the food of the offering made by fire, a sweet savor unto Yahweh, shall be offered beside the continued burnt offering and the drink offering thereof. On the 7th day ye shall have a holy convocation, ye shall do no manner of servile work." So we see there the drink offering, right, of the continue of the daily offering. So if we go all the way to the top of the same chapter, "And Jehovah spoke unto Moses, saying, Command the children of Israel, and say unto them, My food which is presented unto me for offerings made by fire of a sweet savor unto me, shall ye observe to offer unto me in its due season. And thou shalt say unto them, This is the offering made by fire, which ye shall bring unto Jehovah. He lambs of the first year without blemish, 2 day by day, for continual burnt offering. The 1 lamb shall thou offer in the morning, and the other lamb shall thou offer at dusk." So this is the daily offering. This is what you present before the Most High. The priest got to present to the Most High on a daily basis. "And the 10th part of an ephah of fine flour for a meal offering, mingled with the 4th part of a hin of beaten oil." So this is every day of the year. This was the job of the priest, that they had to present this to the Most High God every day. "It is a continued burnt offering which was offered in Mount Sinai for a sweet savor, an offering made by fire unto Jehovah. And the drink offering thereof shall be a 4th part of a hin. For the 1 lamb in the holy place shalt thou pour out a drink offering, a strong drink unto Jehovah." This is saying a strong drink.
Yeah, and that would be the wine, because going back to Leviticus in chapters 1 through 5, when we read about the drink offerings that are associated with the burnt offering and the meal offering and everything, is talk about wine specifically.
So my question to you is this, as going back to the wine. So this is a daily drink offering. So that means we had to have wine 365 days of the year in order to offer it before the Creator. Am I right or wrong?
Right. Because, you know, and as you mentioned earlier, wine is not something that you will make overnight. So wine is something that takes, depending on the strength that you want to make it, it's going to take days, it's going to take weeks, months in order to make it. So that's why that wasn't the prohibition during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, because it was something that's going to be around, and you would use it for the offerings. You know, and especially back in the ancient times in the Mediterranean area, you know, wine was something that people drank with their meals. You know, we weren't juicing our fruits like we do today. We didn't have juices and things like that. So, and we didn't have refrigerators to preserve juice and things like that. So either you were drinking water or you were drinking wine. So that was just something that was readily available for people to drink. Strong drink, as we know it today, would be the stronger liquors than wine. That's what people would, you know, drink for recreation. But generally, you know, wine was a common drink for young and old.
So if the Torah says get all the leavening out of your borders, right? I'm just logically, this is for somebody who's new, who might not know. So and they're hearing this argument. So if Torah says get all the leavening out of your border, but we offer up a drink offering on Pesach, and as a continual daily offering, then that would not be talking about wine or strong drink, as it says here, right or wrong?
Right. Yeah, so that's why at our congregation we never teach that we have to get rid of wine, during that time. I personally don't drink wine anytime during the year, but we just have to make a difference between what Torah teaches and what tradition teaches. And Torah does not teach that we have to get rid of wine during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And as you mentioned that, we would have wine daily, and an increased abundance of wine being offered during the Feast of Unleavened Bread to go along with those additional offerings that would be done for those 7 days. So that's not something that would be removed from our borders. And we were commanded to remove them from our houses in Exodus 20:12, and from our borders in Exodus 13. So whether you want to use the term houses or borders, that means that leaven had to be removed from the entire land, period. And it's not something that would take a lot of time to get rid of. It's not a bunch of ingredients that would take time to remove. So wine wouldn't be included on that list, as well as any type of fermented fruit product wouldn't be on that list. So that's why we teach primarily, we focus on the leavened grain products. And, because the question was asked about the list. So I know Chief Uziel has, on the D.C.B.org, there's a link that will get you the list of ingredients. But I know Chief Uziel, he has the list also, so he'll be able to do a better job than I am of being able to post it on the YouTube channel for people to get that list also.
All right, so what I'm doing right now, I just posted our website right there. So if you go there, what I'm going to do is when this is done, I'm going to put the list on the bottom of this as a link, so that you will be able to download the link and be able to go over all the, the list of the ingredients. But somebody asked a question about the, can you please go over the ingredients that are not allowed in the toothpaste and soaps? I think the toothpaste is mainly sodium bicarbonate, baking soda, sodium bicarbonate, right?
Yeah, that's a primary one. There are some toothpaste companies that may have some of the other things on the list. So basically, when that list is shown again, then that's what the list. Basically, that list you can go shopping with that list and know what to look for. So you take that list with you when you're going shopping for the season, and whatever's on that list is something that you won't buy. And that's basically how we practice it. So the list may look long, but actually a lot of the items on the list are repetitive. So they're just variations of baking soda, yeast, baking powder, just under different names. So once again, the list may look long, but those are just variations of the items such as baking soda and yeast that we not allowed to have in our homes during that time.
It's because Dina is asking the question about the soap. So to be safe, I'm gonna give you a soap. Dr. Bronner's peppermint soap, almond soap, any kind of peppermint soap that's a natural based peppermint soap, be on the safe side, or almond soap, especially the ones from Dr. Bronner's, right? I don't know how to spell it, how to especially spell it, but if you go to any health food store, and I believe like Walgreens and CVS and places like this began to sell the peppermint soap. Peppermint soap is safe. Now, Dr. Bronner's, I believe, is the peppermint soap that you could brush your teeth with. You could do a bunch of stuff with, wash dishes, but they got products out there. You got the Tom's natural toothpaste. You can also find that at your, I believe, Walmarts and all these different places also sell the Tom's toothpaste without the baking, the baking soda in it or the sodium bicarbonate. All you have to do is read the ingredients, and those are safe. There's also a brand of toothpaste called Pilu. I don't know if they still have that toothpaste, but that used to be a brand that we also used to use. All right. So I hope that that helps you out, Sister Dina. You got the Tom's toothpaste, you get the Tom's deodorant, and you also get the Dr. Bronner's peppermint soap or almond soap or whatever it is. Yeah, the ingredients usually change. That's generally what happened. That's why we implore everybody to read the ingredients. And if you're going to get wine, because you know, I did my research on the wines. If you're going to get wine, make sure that it says kosher for Passover. Don't get just any straight up wine, because you want to be sure about what you're drinking. So when you do get wine, and if you do get wine, I don't drink wine. I'm not a wine drinker. I'm not really a drinker. If you see me drinking, it's once every 3 years or something like that. But I don't really drink. So and I don't get into the habit of drinking during holy days, and very rarely. So if you do drink wine, make sure that the wine that you're getting says kosher for Passover. And we usually don't emphasize on the word kosher, but if you're going to drink wine, we emphasize on that word kosher for Passover, so that you don't, because the preparation for that wine is different than the preparation for regular wine. And that's why they emphasize on the kosher for Passover wine. Okay? Rabbi Chief Binyamin?
And for let everybody know, beer is completely out for the 7 days. Whether you drink beer or not, or wine or not during those 7 days, beer is completely out for the Feast of Unleavened Bread, because that comes from a grain product. So wines come from fruit products, beers come from grain products, and because beer is a fermented grain, beer is out for the 7 days of the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
So you got beer, and you got what else there was something else that I wanted to touch on, and I forgot. I just want to cover all bases, so that way no one will be confused and everybody will know exactly what is it that they have to do and what they cannot do. Just want to be safe. You may not be aware, but Tom's has sodium bicarbonate in it. Yeah, but you have to read all the Tom's. Not all the Tom's have sodium bicarbonate. The sodium bicarbonate, I believe, is what they put into the toothpaste to whiten the teeth. You got to read. They do make a Tom's or two that don't have the sodium bicarbonate on it.
Yeah, they have a few, because me personally, the Tom's is what I use all year round, but specifically for Feast of Unleavened Bread, I get the one that doesn't have the baking soda in it. So yeah, all Tom's don't have baking soda in it. But you do have to read on the list of the ingredients of the one you're getting, because on the packaging may look the same, it may be the same flavor, but then they do make some that have it and some that don't have it.
Yes, so you just have to be careful with that. So we just we're trying to put everybody on the right track, on the Torah track, and not veer off to the left nor to the right. Is there anything else that you might want to cover? If you got any questions out there, if you have any questions out there, please ask them now, because we're going to wrap it up if you don't have any more questions. So please ask your questions now, so that way we will be able to answer all your questions. And anyway, if you got more questions, you can leave it at the bottom of the after the stream is up. You can ask your questions at the bottom of the video, and I'll ask Chief Binyamin to regularly check it, so that he could go back and answer some of your questions that you might type in if you're catching this later and you're not catching it live. So okay, there's, I guess, pretty much a lot of people know what it is and what's going on. So before we close out, Rabbi Chief Binyamin, can you give us do you have anything coming up coming up soon. Can you give people your information, all your social media information? Let people know, you know, what's coming up, what are new things that are coming up, and what's happening.
Okay, in terms of email, people can email me once again at Binyamin@BinahYisrael.org. That's a new email address I created, you know, recently, so people could contact me. Binah Yisrael is spelled BNEI, and then Yisrael YISRAEL.org. If you use .com, it won't work. So just email me at Binyamin, BENYAMIN @BinahYisrael.org. And in terms of things that I have coming up is, you know, people can find me on Facebook, Binyamin B. And, you know, that way, anything that I have coming up, you know, I don't have anything particular coming up now, but, you know, there'll be some things coming up soon. You know, recently, and I was involved with a project with other people of doing the bus trip to the African American Museum in D.C., you know, just to give people a little bit of background of the type of events I like to get into. So, you know, things like that will be coming up soon, so people could always stay in touch. You know, people can contact me through the Chief Uziel Levy channel, you know, contact him also, and he'll get in touch with me. You know, same thing with the CHOKMAH BINAH channel. And in terms of this subject, you know, we'll probably do another question and answer. It was maybe this Shabbat or the following Shabbat, you know, at least one more time before Pesach comes in. But, you know, we've gotten to the point, which is good, you know, for all of us, that there's not a lot of questions. You know, like I said earlier, we try to learn from each other, and, you know, we don't have all the answers, but, you know, we're willing to listen, we're willing to learn, but we want to have a discussion on a Torah level. So that's why a lot of times we may make the difference between what's in Torah and what's tradition. And that's what we try to stress the importance of. And usually it's the traditions that separate us, and it's not Torah. You know, Torah is something that holds us together, but when we try to hold on to our own traditions, that's the thing that separates us. And we have to be able to separate our traditions from what Torah actually says. So, you know, those are the way to reach me. And, you know, if anybody has anything that they have in mind, you know, any events, anything that they have, you know, I'll be willing to, you know, help. You know, for instance, you know, at our congregation, you know, we'll have another Qum coming up, you know, which is the Unity Shabbat weekend. That'll be during the Memorial Day weekend in May. The Memorial Day weekend, as is known in the U.S., you know, we'll have a Unity Shabbat and also an event on the following day of the Yom Rishon. And I know there's other events coming up, you know, throughout the summer in other congregations, and, you know, just stay in touch, and, you know, whatever it is that we can do to help each other, that's what we're here for.
Thank you, Chief. There was one more thing that I had to address with you, and it just flew my mind. So there you have it, everyone. He gave up all his information. If you have any questions, you can reach out to him personally, or any one of our YouTube channels, the Uziel Levy channel, or even the D.C.B channel. You can reach out and you can leave messages. Hopefully this was helpful. Oh, someone asked, Chief, why is it wrong to give food to people who don't do Passover? Meaning, like, the food that the people are giving away, why is it wrong to give it away for Passover?
Okay. Basically, we wouldn't want to do that for the same reason we wouldn't want to have somebody work for us on Shabbat. You know, related to this Shabbat, just because somebody doesn't keep Shabbat, we don't want to have them doing things that they shouldn't do. You know, it has been the simple out for a lot of people to give away food to people who don't keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread, but just on the level of integrity, that's not a practice that we should want to get into. That, you know, I know people are going to say, well, if, you know, people, and it'll be an excuse. You know, people say, well, I'm giving it to a family that's hungry, but generally that's not what people do. People give it to their friends and family that don't keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread. We just have to be honest. That's not what it is. But, you know, people say, well, I give it to somebody that's hungry and they don't have much. But we have to have integrity as the children of Yisrael also. So we wouldn't want people to, well, we shouldn't want people to do things that we're not able to do. And especially you never know what's going to happen in the future. You give somebody something that they're not supposed to eat during that time, and then 2 to 5 years later, they start to find about this way of life and they really want to learn, and then they come in and they turn around and tell you, well, why did you feel it was okay to give me something I wasn't supposed to have? And then that's when you lose integrity for yourself. So it's more, you know, answering that question is more on a level of integrity, that not just that subject, but on any subject, we shouldn't want to have people do things that we're not able to do. And that's how we make ourselves better people. And that's how, you know, a way of introducing people to our God, by letting them know that we want to include them in the things that we do, as opposed to keeping them far away from the things that we do and leading them astray overall. And if there was a Torah or a Torah-based answer towards that, it would be in terms of leading the blind astray. I mean, that's a loose interpretation of that, a very loose interpretation. So, I'll admit that it's a very loose interpretation of doing that. But we don't want to lead the blind astray, but we want to have integrity and have people come into our way of life, as opposed to pushing them further into what they do.
And also, the last thing, can you please tell people when we will be observing the Passover, the first day, all the way through the last day, and what is it that we keep?
Okay, so the Passover night will be for us, for our congregation, on what is known to the world as April 10th, or that Monday night on Monday, April 10th, is when the sun goes down. It'll begin the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and that's when we'll have our Passover night service. Now, in terms of if we were in the land and having an actual Passover sacrifice, that actually would be done before the sun goes down. But because we don't have a Passover lamb and we don't do sacrifices, our observance of the eating the unleavened bread and the bitter herbs that take place that night will begin after sundown on Monday the 10th. And then that once again leads automatically into the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which begins sundown that same day up until the sundown of the 11th. So for that period of time, it will be the first day for us, which is a holy day. So basically the 10th at night and the 11th during the day is when we don't do any work, we don't go to school, because we'll be observing that as a holy day. So and I know there'll be more information in terms of where we'll be keeping Passover at night and where we'll be keeping the Feast of Unleavened Bread during the day. That'll come out very shortly, but in terms of the date, that's when we will be observing it.
Torah by Chief. And for all of you that are going to be observing it with us, or will just want to help us out in the Passover dues or whatever, it's $40. If you know, because many of you feel a part online, you might just want to help us out. So it's $40 per single for Passover dues and $80 per family. So if you want to help out and making our feast great, or the visitors that come see us so we can provide food and not whatnot, then that's what it is. All right. So I don't know, Rabbi, do you got any closing statements, and then we can close out?
I just once again want to thank Yehovah God for this forum, the opportunity to have this forum, and praying that we didn't lead anybody astray, and praying that we were helpful and that we allowed ourselves to be helped as well, and praying for a peaceful season to come and a successful season for all of us, wherever we're going to be keeping it, you know, praying that the presence of God will be with all of us throughout the earth as we're trying to get back. You know, we're in captivity, and we're trying to work towards another redemption. You know, Yehovah did it for us before, and he can definitely, and he will do it for us again. So we await that day that it comes, but we have to observe these days in order for that redemption to come. We have to keep these commandments, these statutes and judgments in the land of captivity in order for that day of redemption. And, you know, we read that in Deuteronomy chapter 30, that when we bethink ourselves and we return to God, you know, just paraphrasing, we return to God and keep the commandments that he has given us, then we'll be able to, that he will save us and we'll be able to return to the land again. So just praying for humility and praying for increased knowledge, wisdom, and understanding for all of us as we, you know, move forward and trying to become better people in his sight.
Okay, Torah Chief, and I really appreciate taking the time out of your day, of your evening, to come and explain to the people, especially to the new ones, and to the ones that just needed to be refreshed on this. Torah Rabbi, for your life, thanking the Most High God for your successes, that he may continue to bless you with many more. I hope and pray that we've all got something out of the stream tonight, that we've gotten some understanding and some wisdom. And I hope and I pray that everyone would understand, go back and listen, and look at Torah rather than follow opinion or feelings. This is not about opinions or feelings. This is about Torah and what we try to bring forth with Torah. So with that, hoping and praying that we all got some knowledge, wisdom, and understanding tonight. I thank my brother Chief Binyamin once again, and praying that the Most High God be with us all. Shalom, shalom.